The clue was fresh sawdust at the base of the dead vine. A few feet away, the survivor was green and setting fruit. Same soil, same summer. The real difference was when I planted them. That bothered me because every guide made squash vine borers sound like a threat you had to fight until frost with foil, BT spray, and morning egg checks. They not. The moth has a short season of its own. Once you understand where that season ends, a second planting can slip past it without a single spray. The date changes by region. The question is when that clock stops in your yard. My squash looked perfect on a Tuesday evening. By Thursday morning, the whole vine was lying flat in the dirt like someone had pulled the plug on it. I had done everything right that summer. Watered twice a week, deep soaks, right at the base. Fed it on schedule with the same fertilizer I always use. By late June, it was pushing out leaves the size of dinner plates, climbing the trellis, setting little yellow flowers everywhere. I remember standing there in early July with my coffee, thinking this was going to be my best squash year yet. Then Thursday happened. No warning, no slow yellowing at the edges, nothing that looked like the underwatering or the powdery mildew I had dealt with before in other summers. Just a vine that was green at sunset and collapsed by sunrise, like the whole plant had simply run out of whatever was keeping it standing. I got down on my knees and looked at the base of the stem, right where it met the soil. That is when I saw it. A little pile of what looked like wet sawdust, packed right up against the stem like something had been chewing its way in from the inside. Fungus does not leave sawdust. Neither does a dry spell. Something had been living inside that stem for weeks already, tunneling through the middle of it and cutting off the water and food that vine needed to survive. By the time I saw the evidence sitting there in the dirt, the damage underneath was already done. My first thought was not curiosity. It was dread. I had read enough gardening forums to know what came next. Wrap the base of every squash stem in foil. Spray BT insecticide on a schedule the guide swore by. Walk the garden every single morning, checking the undersides of leaves for tiny reddish-brown eggs. A full season of defense? Or just walk away and plant something easier next year? Standing over that dead vine, giving up on squash entirely honestly felt like the more reasonable option. I did what every guide told me to do after that. Foil around the stems. BT spray every 10 days. Checking for eggs every single morning. And it worked. Sort of. It also felt like a part-time job. Then I found one sentence in an entomology bulletin that made the whole job disappear. And that right there is exactly the moment everything I thought I knew about this bug turned out to be wrong. I was reading a University of Kentucky entomology bulletin one night after everyone else had gone to bed, mostly just trying to figure out what I was dealing with, and I hit a sentence that stopped me cold. It said, "Moth flight continues through mid-August in parts of the state." Flight. Not, "the bug is out there all summer waiting to strike." Flight. Like it has a schedule, like it clocks in and clocks out. Here's the part nobody tells you when they hand you a jug of BT spray. The thing that killed your squash is not really a worm at all. It is the larva of a moth, a day-flying moth, wings mostly clear like a wasp's. Body striped orange and black so convincingly that most gardeners who spot one in their yard assume it is something that stings. Militia cucurbitae, it is called, part of the clearwing family. It does not hide in the shadows. It flies in broad daylight, right past you, while you are out there weeding, and most people wave it off thinking a wasp just wandered into the garden. That moth spends the winter as a pupa, buried about an inch or two down in the soil, right under where last year's vines grew. It is not dead. It is not dormant forever. It is waiting on a clock. Somewhere between late May and early or mid-July, depending on where you garden, that clock runs out and the moth emerges, mates, and starts laying eggs on your squash stems. And here is the piece that changes everything. That laying window does not last all season. It runs about 4 to 6 weeks in most areas. In warmer states like Kentucky, the flight can stretch into the middle of August, but it still ends. After that window closes, there are no more moths laying fresh eggs on your vines. Not because they got full, because their season is over. Think of the moth like a mail carrier with one route and one shift. Once that shift ends for the season, no more mail gets delivered to your squash stems. Not because the moth stopped wanting to, because its clock ran out. Once an egg does land on a stem, it hatches in 7 to 14 days, and the larva goes straight to work boring in. That is the part that actually kills the plant, the tunneling inside the stem that cuts off water and food long before you see a symptom on top. But none of that happens unless an egg gets laid on your plant in the first place. No moth flying, no eggs. No eggs, no borer. What that actually means for your garden is simple. Every single defense trick, the foil, the spray, the daily egg patrol, only matters while that moth is still in the air. The moment her shift ends for the season, your squash stems stop being a target, whether you defended them or not. That single sentence in that bulletin meant every bit of that summer-long campaign. The foil, the spray, the morning egg checks, was solving the wrong problem. I was not fighting an endless war. I was fighting a bug that had already clocked out for the season in a lot of cases, and I just did not know it yet. This is not identical everywhere, and I want to be straight with you about that. Gardeners in the Deep South sometimes get a second, shorter generation of moths later in the year, and short-season northern gardens close their window earlier than Kentucky does. But the shape of it holds up everywhere. There is a start, there is an end, and everything in between is the only window you actually need to defend against. So if the moth's clock is really what matters, the only question left is, what does that clock say in your yard? Here is the honest answer. It depends on where you live, and I am not going to pretend otherwise. In colder one-generation areas, adult flight often tapers off from late July into early or mid-August, depending on the year. Check your local extension's trap report instead of treating July 31 as a fixed date. Once you are past that mark, you can drop seeds in the ground without worrying much about who is still out there looking for a place to lay eggs. That is the whole trick for a short-season garden. One date on the calendar, and the threat that killed your first batch simply is not flying anymore. If you are in Kentucky or nearby parts of the Mid-South, the moths keep flying later. Activity there can run all the way through the middle of August. Plant your second batch after that point, and you are planting into a much quieter yard. Go further south, into the Gulf Coast, Florida, or Texas, and the picture gets messier. Some of these regions can get a second, shorter generation of moths later in the season. I am not going to hand you a fake date here. If you are gardening in deep summer heat that never really lets up, the smartest move is watching your own yard. Check the base of your remaining vines every few days. Frass tells you a larva already got in, not whether moths are still flying. Check your local extension's trap report, or watch a pheromone trap for a week straight before you call the window closed. Once you know your window is open, the next decision is which seed to grab. Most summer squash and zucchini varieties reach harvest in about 45 to 60 days from seed. That is the number that matters now, because your second planting is not racing the bug anymore. You are racing the calendar to first frost, and that is a race you can actually win. A vine planted in early June has all summer to reach maturity. A vine planted after your flight window closes has fewer weeks left before the season ends. So the days to maturity number on that seed packet suddenly carries a lot more weight than it did the first time around. That number is your whole strategy now. Gardeners further south get more runway before frost shows up, which gives a little breathing room if timing was not perfect. Gardeners further north are working with a tighter gap, so leaning toward a variety on the faster end of that 45 to 60-day range buys back some margin. Either way, you are not guessing anymore. While you are picking seed, it is worth knowing not every squash handles this bug the same way. Hubbard and zucchini tend to take the worst of it. Acorn squash is not far behind. Butternut and some crookneck types usually hold up better. Put the 3 pieces together and here is the whole method. Figure out which region you are in. Pick a fast maturing variety. Plant after your window closes. No foil. No BT. No walking the garden every morning hunting for eggs. If you already lost a batch this summer, you are not behind. You are actually in the best position to plant the one that works. Here is the limit. This does not promise an exact date for every zip code, especially in the Deep South where a second generation is possible. The calendar gives you a range, not a guarantee. Watch your old vine bases for fresh frass before you commit your second planting. And let what you actually see in your yard have the final say. Anyone who has lost a batch to this before will tell you the same thing. Watch the vine, not the calendar app. If knowing exactly when the moth stops flying saves you another summer of foil and spray, subscribe and hit the bell. Every video, same level of specific. Timing gets you 90-some% of the way there, but one more thing turns that into close to 100. If you have a choice between a bush variety and a vining one, the vining type gives you a hidden advantage. As that vine crawls along the ground, it does not just grow longer. Every leaf node that touches soil can put down its own set of roots. Think of it like giving the plant a second heart. If the main one gets damaged, the backup keeps pumping. Butternut and spaghetti squash both do this naturally. Scoop up a handful of damp soil and mound it over a few of those nodes as the vine runs. Let each one root before you count on it. This is not a replacement for anything I just told you. It is a backup, in case timing was not perfect or a stray moth from a late second generation finds your vine anyway. A viewer down in Kentucky wrote to me about exactly this. She had planted zephyr squash, done everything right on timing, and still found frass at the base of the main stem in late August. Instead of pulling the plant, she split the stem open with a knife, pulled the borer out by hand, and packed damp soil over the wound and the nearest nodes along the vine. The plant kept growing. She got squash off it right through September. That is what this trick is for, not a reason to go back to wrapping every stem in foil or spraying every 10 days like the villain from the start of this video. Those extra roots just keep pulling water if the main stem gets chewed up. One more limit worth naming. Extra roots can help a vining plant withstand damage to the main stem. They are not a guarantee. It will not survive an entire season's worth if you plant straight into the peak of the flight window. This backs up good timing. It does not replace it. Between the right planting date and a few mounded nodes, you are not fighting this bug anymore. You are just working around its schedule. This bug never had an appetite that couldn't be timed. It just had a schedule nobody bothered to check. Once you understand that, every squash you lose to it stops feeling like bad luck and starts looking like a date you simply missed on the calendar. The bug never changed. What changed is knowing when to stop fighting it and start working around it instead. This weekend, walk out to wherever your first batch died and check the base of that old stem one more time. Frass tells you a larva already got in, not whether moths are still flying. Check your local extension's trap report or watch a pheromone trap for a week straight before you call the window closed. Grab a fast-maturing summer squash variety and get it in the ground before Sunday night. The moth follows a schedule now. Your planting can follow it too.